All right. Hey, everybody. Chuck Holton. Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, June 15th at noon Eastern time on the East Coast of America. I'm not in the East Coast of America. I'm in Panama in my studio today. I'll be heading to the United States very shortly to cover the inauguration protests. Let's hope there aren't any and I can just enjoy myself. But it's good to see all of you online here today. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can get alerted when we're about to go live. And that way you won't miss any of these. We have breaking news that is coming out of Israel. The Jerusalem Post is saying that a Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal has been reached, according to U.S. and Israeli sources. Now, they have been on the edge of a ceasefire deal for several days or even weeks. And there have been a lot of, rumors that it was going to happen. It has been getting closer and closer. As you know, Donald Trump has been threatening that all hell would break out in the Middle East if the hostages were not released by the time he takes office on Monday. And so that obviously puts some pressure on the negotiations. Now, Anthony Blinken and the Biden administration are certainly going to be taking credit for negotiating this ceasefire deal without a doubt. And I say, go ahead and let them, because it's not actually that great for Israel. Let me tell you what I mean by that. A lot of Israelis are not happy with this deal, even though it will eventuate the release of some of their hostages. So the deal as it stands right now, they're saying that Hamas is coming back last minute and making some changes to this. I'll talk about that in just a second, so don't go anywhere, because we're going to get into all the details of this hostage release deal. So as of right now, it's a phased ceasefire implementation. The initial ceasefire period will be a 42-day cessation of hostilities, during which both parties agree to halt offensive operations. Now, we'll see how that goes. The Israelis actually regularly take tactical pauses in Gaza and step back and allow people to move from one place to another, or they call for people to evacuate an area, and then they'll sit back and they don't strike anything for a while, and they let the people leave that area. So it is certain that the Israelis will abide by that, but it's not so certain that that Hamas will abide by that, because a large part of the fighting that Hamas has been doing over the last weeks and months has been a sort of passive insurgency. What I mean by that is, although there's been plenty of instances of Hamas outright shooting at Israeli soldiers or firing mortars at them, within Gaza, or even firing rockets from other parts of Gaza at the Israeli soldiers in other parts of Gaza. What I mean is that they have basically booby-trapped everything in Gaza. There are booby traps and roadside bombs and improvised explosive devices everywhere around Gaza. And the majority of the casualties that the IDF has sustained in recent weeks have mostly come from these roadside bombs and booby traps. So they'll enter a building, there's tripwires, there's all sorts of tricks employed to collapse the building on top of the people that go into it. That's why they're using drones so much to go and explore buildings now and then. And if they see one tripwire or one explosive or anything that makes it a militarized building, they will just flatten that building. They just don't even bother going in, they just flatten it. But the problem is Hamas has taken a page from the insurgency that they had in Afghanistan. And I want to talk more about the link between October 7th and Afghanistan a little later. But they've learned a lot from other insurgencies. And I can tell you, in the times that I've got 12 trips to Afghanistan, probably 15 trips to Iraq during the wars, covering the conflicts. And man, the creativity that these guys displayed coming up with creative ways to blow people up was just mind-boggling. That what they'll do is they'll take the threshold up from the door, you know, wooden or a metal threshold, and then they pack it with explosives underneath, and then put a pressure switch as they put that thing back into place, so that all you have to do is step on that threshold and the whole thing goes up. My friend Ryan, I just spaced on his name. Anyway, a friend of mine, a Special Forces soldier, actually lost part of one leg that way, part of his foot. And by stepping on actually it was a building that they had been in and out of a lot in Afghanistan. They had been around that area for quite some time, but apparently nobody stepped in just the right place. And he was the unlucky one that stepped on the threshold of the door, and it, you know, got him. They will bury pressure plates around in the yard. That you can imagine that there are going to be little kids and civilians getting blown up for some time to come, because if the IDF pulls out, they have placed, not they, the IDF, but I mean Hamas has placed so many booby traps around Gaza that you're going to hear explosions throughout Gaza probably on a daily basis, and kids and civilians are going to be getting wounded and killed by those things for a long time to come. And that's, you know, just one unfortunate thing about the way that Hamas conducts their war. But this initial ceasefire period is supposed to be a 42-day cessation of hostilities, as I mentioned. Both parties halt offensive operations, and then they start to release prisoners. Now, Hamas is committing to the release of 33 Israeli hostages, and they're supposed to be prioritizing women, children, the elderly, and the wounded. Now, they've been fighting back and forth about whether or not they would turn over a list of what hostages they would release before the deal is concluded. And I have not seen any conclusive information one way or the other about whether they actually finally agreed to a list of who they were going to release. And the reason probably that Hamas is balking at doing that is because they have no idea where any of these people are, and they're going to have a real hard time finding the hostages, and they don't know if they're actually alive or not. So they're supposed to be prioritizing children, elderly, the women, and the wounded. It will be interesting to see how many of the hostages they turn over that are actual just bodies. That was one thing that Israel was, it was a sticking point. Israel's like, the first 33, we want all of them to be living hostages. And Hamas is like, we don't know where the hostages are. We don't know if they're alive or not. I have been saying for some time that I would be surprised if they get more than a dozen or two hostages out alive after the initial release of hostages back on November 30th of last year. Of 2023. So it's been more than a year now since they have released any hostages voluntarily. And I said it's going to be a miracle if they get more than maybe 20 or so, 22, 24 live hostages out. I hope I'm wrong on that. I hope they get 100 live hostages out, but it's just not likely. And so we will see which ones actually get released once this thing gets done. Now, on Israeli part, Israel has agreed to release in the first tranche, in exchange for those 33 hostages, the Israelis have agreed to release 1,000 Palestinian prisoners who have been, these are terrorists, rapists, murderers, you know, very, very bad people who have been convicted of crimes against the Israeli citizens. And they are going to be released in exchange for just 33 Israelis. Now, if you want to know who sees that as a win, well, there have been tons of protests happening in Tel Aviv by the families of the hostages. Netanyahu has just in the last few hours met with some of the families of the hostages to tell them whether or not it was their family that may get released. There are still 7 American hostages that are being held. We will see. I expect that most, if not all of those, will be among the ones that are released. Obviously, an American hostage is more valuable to Hamas than a not American hostage. But with Donald Trump's threats happening, we will see how seriously Hamas is taking those threats by whether or not the 7 Americans are released. And, Donald Trump, we'll also see what Donald Trump's, mettle is, what his, how serious he is. If all 7 of the American hostages are not among the first group that are released, and they're not released before Donald Trump takes office on Monday, it will be interesting to see whether or not Donald Trump will do anything about that, as he claims he will. Now, Hirsch, that one American that was basically, he was held hostage for over a year. This is down in Rafah. The IDF was getting close to the location where he was being held, and before he could be rescued, the Hamas fighters murdered him and all the other hostages with him. And so it'll be interesting to see how Hamas does this. Now, if you want to know who believes this is a win, well, first of all, there are a lot of Jews that I'm hearing from who are not happy about this at all. They feel like it is allowed, because this is the first step, don't make any mistake about it, to the permanent cessation of hostilities in Gaza. And if this goes through, if they stop for 42 days, there's a good chance that they will not start back up again. And if they don't start back up again, then Hamas survives. Now, so there are a lot of Jews who are not happy with this, but let me show you what the Palestinians think about the possibility of a ceasefire deal happening in the next few hours. This is immediately, this video just came out of Han Yunis in Gaza. This video I'm about to show you. And I want you to listen. I'm going to turn the sound up. I want you to listen to the celebrating. That's just 30 seconds of the celebrations taking place in Han Yunis. There are videos coming out from other parts of Gaza as well. All across Gaza tonight, there are celebrations happening because they are claiming victory. Most of Gaza has been flattened. To hear the Gaza Health Ministry tell it, almost 48,000 Gazans have been brutally murdered by Israel. That's what they say. Virtually all of them women and children. None of them, of course, were Hamas fighters, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. They were all civilians. And yet they are calling this they are calling this one a win. They're calling this a victory for Hamas. And this is what they always do. I mean, you have to understand, this is par for the course for, I want to say Muslims in general, specifically Palestinian Muslims, that they can get their clocks cleaned 9 ways from Sunday, and they will come out and say, it's a win. It reminds me of the old Monty Python skit where the knight is trying to, King Arthur is trying to cross a bridge, and there's this knight there, and he says, "None shall pass." And the guy's like, "Hey, I got no problem with you, buddy." And he's like, "None shall pass." And he's like, "Okay, fine." He pulls his sword, and they have a sword fight. And long story short, at the end of the sword fight, the knight that was guarding the bridge is sitting on the ground with no legs and no arms. And he says, "All right, then, we'll call it a draw." And that's a perfect picture of Gaza right now. The Gazans saying that this is a win. Well, there are a lot of Israelis who would agree. That's the sad part. A lot of Jews are looking at this ceasefire deal and saying Hamas still exists. As a matter of fact, Anthony Blinken was saying, look, this is the only way. We have to get this done because Hamas has managed to recruit replacements for all of the soldiers that they've lost in this war. Now, I highly doubt that. They say 25,000 troops before, Hamas operatives, terrorists, whatever, before the war started. And Israel itself claims to have taken out 17 or 18,000 of those guys. So that would leave about 6,000 Hamas fighters. Anthony Blinken says that they've managed to recruit another 17 or 18,000 inside Gaza. Well, there are some people out there that would say, if that's the case, then we ought to just keep on going and kill those guys too. Pete Hegseth was one of those people when he was asked about it yesterday in his confirmation hearings before the Senate committee. He said, I think that Israel should be cleared and set loose to kill every Hamas fighter until they are gone, until there are none left. Now, Israel has not said that they're in the first phase of the operation, the first 42 days, they're not planning to pull out of Gaza in any meaningful way. They're just planning to stop where they are and halt offensive operations. Now, you notice the way that that's worded, offensive operations. They can still engage in defensive operations. So if somebody shoots at them, they can shoot back. And they certainly will. They have been really ramping up the military pressure in recent days, making 40 or 50 airstrikes every day inside Gaza. So, it's just been almost constant. And you can imagine, I kind of feel for the people in Gaza who have probably not gotten a good night's sleep in more than a year. And the ones I care about most are the hostages that have not gotten a good night's sleep in more than a year. It's hard to feel sorry for the rest of the people in Gaza because they are aiding and abetting and harboring the Hamas terrorists who perpetrated October 7th and are continuing to torture the hostages in Gaza. So it's hard to feel bad for them, but you can imagine that they would be celebrating if the news is out that they're going to get to actually sleep in peace, most likely for at least 42 days, and maybe try to start to rebuild a little bit. Now, part of the deal was also that they be allowed to return to whatever areas they want to return to. The IDF is saying that it's going to establish and hold a buffer zone, maintain a buffer zone ranging from 500 to 700 meters inside Gaza's borders. That's not that far. 500 meters is just a little bit outside small arms range, meaning that if a guy was standing on the border fence, somebody 500 meters away would have to be a pretty good shot with a regular AK-47 to be able to hit him, because the effective range of that weapon is only about 400 meters. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't hit him. You just have to do some Kentucky windage. And so it's going to keep people from maybe throwing hand grenades across the border or something like that, but it's not necessarily going to stop rockets or anything from being fired. But that is what they're planning for, a buffer zone, at least at this point. Okay, so please hit the like button, folks. We're about half an hour or 20 minutes into this now. I just want to remind you that it does make a difference for you, for our podcast. If you'll go hit that like button, tells YouTube that more people should be shown this live video, and we'll be able to get this info out to more people. Also, while I'm at it, I just want to mention that over at chuckholton.com, what I'm doing is I'm taking the notes that I do from these lives, I'm writing an article at the same time while I'm keeping the notes, and then I'm putting that article up over at chuckholton.com. So you can go over there and you can actually, if you wanted to, you're like, oh, I don't remember what all the points were of his talk during his live, all the statistics and everything, you can go get all of those over at chuckholton.com. We're putting up a lot of extra content over there on topics that are of interest, but maybe not enough of interest to do a live on them. Stuff, we're doing a lot of research and things like that. So we're putting all that stuff up. So now I want to know from you whether or not you feel that this deal, as it stands right now, is something worth celebrating, or if this is a bad deal for Israel. From what I've told you, there's going to be a immediate cessation of hostilities. Both parties will stop shooting at each other. Hamas is going to commit to releasing 33 women, children, and old people, and the wounded. They don't say exactly who yet. And the Israelis are going to release 1,000 prisoners, convicted, felons, from their jails, and send them back to Gaza. Now, one thing that we know is that Yahya Sinwar, who was instrumental in this whole thing starting, was held as a prisoner and was released in one of these prisoner swaps. And then he went on to foment October 7th. However, there might be a silver lining to that cloud, because it's much cheaper to release these people back into Gaza and then perhaps end the ceasefire and go back to wiping these guys out, or sending them on the express train to Virgin Land, making them experience spontaneous rapid disassembly. I have to be careful again how I talk about this stuff. At the point of a Israeli missile, something like that. That would, in the long run, probably be cheaper. However, you don't know how many of these guys are going to end up, being a part of the next terror attack to strike Israel. And there will be another, negotiating for hostages. One of the problems with that is that it always means there will be more hostages taken. It puts a large value on hostages for Hamas. And so Hamas is going to prioritize taking more of them as soon as they can. And this is why, it probably would not take, and it's a terrible thing to do. It's a terrible thing for the families. And I certainly wouldn't want the Israeli government to do this if it was my family that was being held hostage. But it bears mentioning that if the Israelis just said, look, we don't negotiate for hostages. You take hostages, we're just going to kill you until we get them back, or we find out they're dead. So you might as well kill them, because we're not going to negotiate for them at all. Done. We're just going to keep killing your people until you give them back. And if they just did that after 2 or 3 rounds of this, enough so that the Palestinians would realize that Israel is serious about it, then the taking of hostages would likely cease. But obviously that's not, empathetic at all. And that's a pretty harsh reality right there. Now, the United States has said since the Reagan administration that we do not negotiate with terrorists. So if you take hostages that are American, we're not going to negotiate with those guys to get those hostages released. But what they don't say, this is something that doesn't get talked about much, but that I have found to be very true, is that we will negotiate and pay money, not as ransom to get the hostages out per se, but we will pay money for information leading to the safe release of our hostages. And in reality, that turns out to be basically the same thing as paying a ransom. Okay, so we've kind of cheated on that one a little bit. We say we don't negotiate with terrorists. But if a terrorist comes to us and says, hey, for a little bit of money, I can probably go talk to somebody and then they might release your hostage. And we go, oh, okay, and we pay the money to that guy. Obviously, he's going to be sharing that money with the guys holding the hostages, and so we're negotiating with terrorists, So you've always heard that we don't negotiate with terrorists, but actually we do. But just a lot of people don't actually know that, right? So you all say that this is a bad deal for Israel. I don't disagree at all. I don't disagree at all. Okay, let's talk about phase 2 of the ceasefire deal. Phase 1, release 33 Israelis for 1,000 Palestinians and stop shooting at each other. Phase 2, troops start to redeploy, that is to leave Gaza, and they establish this buffer zone ranging from 500 to 700 meters. That's a half a mile inside Gaza's borders. So that means nobody can, that's a no man's land. If some Palestinians decide to go on walkabout and they cross into that buffer zone, well, they're going to experience a sudden rapid disassembly at the hands of the Israelis. And that is phase number 2. That also includes significant escalation in humanitarian assistance to Gaza, which is kind of ridiculous because they're getting plenty now and they're not even able to distribute the stuff that they have, that they are getting. And again, most of the, or at least a plurality, 40% or so of the aid that's being sent to Gaza is falling right into the hands of Hamas. And you can imagine how Hamas is able to continue recruiting people, even though they're getting their guys whacked left and right. But if you don't belong to Hamas and you get some aid that Hamas didn't give you, okay, you get distributed some aid, what happens is Hamas comes around and collects the aid. They go, hey, we are the ones who decide who gets the aid. Give us that aid back. And because you accepted aid that didn't come from Hamas, take a knee, get on your knees. And then they shoot them in both knees. They shoot them in the backs of their legs. And you'll see cripples all over Gaza now because these guys get shot in the back of the knees. And of course, those casualties, when they show up at the hospital, they get blamed on Israel. They don't get blamed on Hamas. And so if you have a choice of starving or because I don't have any money to buy aid from Hamas, or going and joining Hamas and becoming one of them, and you get to be the guy who shoots other people in the kneecaps, well, it's not a difficult choice for most of those guys. I mean, it's not much of a choice. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now, so phase 2 of the operation, Israel is supposed to significantly allow the escalation of humanitarian assistance to Gaza. That doesn't mean the aid is coming from Israel exactly. It means Israel is just allowing anybody who wants to take aid in there to be able to take it. Now, at the last minute, a little sticking point comes up, and Hamas always does this in these negotiations. They always wait until the very last second where everybody is saying that they are, that it's a done deal. they've got a deal negotiated. It's a done deal. And then Hamas goes, oh, but wait, by the way. And this time they're saying, we want Israel to pull out of the Philadelphia corridor, which is that no man's land they've cleared out along the Egyptian border with Gaza, and because they've closed off all the tunnels and everything that allowed them to bring contraband, meaning weapons and such, across the border from Egypt. And so at the last minute, the last thing that showed up on Israel in the Israeli news here is that Hamas said, oh, by the way, Israel has to leave the Philadelphia corridor. And Israel's like, whoa, time out. Not happening. We are not leaving the Philadelphia corridor, because if we do, then Hamas is going to start rearming themselves from Egypt. And so, no, we're not doing that. That's not, well, what's the Biden administration doing? They are pressuring Israel to accept that bad, very bad portion of the deal. Yes, come on, you guys can pull out of Gaza. Of the Philadelphia corridor, of course. So we may start seeing hostages being released today, even, and certainly before Monday. And like I say, a lot of that has to do with the pressure that Donald Trump has been putting on them. But the Biden administration is really to blame for this agreement, okay? I have to say, again, nothing against what Trump said. I think that was the right thing for him to do. But him doing this, and it's very clear Donald Trump really, really wants to be able to point to this and say, I made that happen by my threats. Simply the threat of unleashing hell in Gaza was enough to make Hamas accept a deal that they would not accept before, or that they would not have accepted otherwise. However, you need to understand that a lot of the pressure that was being brought to bear by Donald Trump was not just on Hamas. It was on Israel. Trump sent his envoy to Israel to meet with Netanyahu. And there's in local Israeli news, they're reporting that after reporting back to Donald Trump, Trump said of Netanyahu that he is a dark son of a bee, which doesn't sound great. But that what Trump has been doing is also putting pressure on Israel to make this happen. And it's all political. It's a political ploy to make himself look like the master negotiator, which he is. But this is, see Daniel saying, Christians rejoice for peace. Yes, but I think Christians would rejoice more for a lasting peace, and not a peace that came through capitulation to terrorists who will very surely break the peace the first chance that they get. They just need some time to rebuild, to lick their wounds, and to rearm, and then they'll come back and they will try this again. And maybe next time it won't be in Israel, it'll be in the United States. So on that note, many of you have sent me this video. There's a video from the Sean Ryan podcast where he interviews a CIA operative who is Sarah, what's her name? And she points out that they managed to create a direct connection between the attacks on October 7th and the planning and training for those attacks. And she says that that planning and training took place not in Iran, not in Gaza, not in Lebanon. It took place in Afghanistan. and it was aided and abetted and assisted, Sarah Adams, thank you, assisted by the Taliban. So Joe Biden's disastrous pullout in 2021, August 30th, 2021, of Afghanistan is continuing to pay bloody dividends around the world. And that gave the Taliban the ability to assist Hamas in planning and training the attacks of October 7th. So it would be interesting to see if Israel, if the Trump administration did take the fetters off of Israel, if Israel will now direct some of its kinetic attention at Afghanistan in the near future, although I kind of doubt it. Okay, let's go back to the ceasefire. Just for those of you who are just coming on here, there is a ceasefire deal that's been announced. Donald Trump just came out and said that there should be hostages being released very shortly. It's a phased ceasefire implementation that has 3 phases. The first phase, 42-day cessation of hostilities during which both parties stop shooting at each other. They agree to anyway. Hamas commits to release 33 Israeli hostages and prioritize women, children, the elderly, and the wounded, and hopefully the alive, because there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not in the first group of hostages being released that it would be a bunch of bodies. Secondly, Israel in the second phase will begin a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas in Gaza and establish a buffer zone that ranges from about a half a mile on all of Gaza's borders, all of them. Then they will increase the allowance of aid going into Gaza, and as a part of the third phase, will initiate reconstruction efforts paid for by, take a guess, put in the comments who you think will pay for much of the rebuilding efforts in Gaza, to rebuild Gaza and make it better than it was before the war. How many people think it's going to be the United States that ends up paying for it? Raise your hand. Right? Hey, thank you, Linda. Question, does Trump want to be seen as the president who aided the next October 7th? No, he doesn't. He wants to be seen as the one who ended the war. And the way it looks like this is going to happen, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration are going to be able to claim that they ended the war, which is crazy and kind of ironic. Okay? Yeah, so a lot of people are agreeing with me that it sounds like most likely the United States is going to end up paying the Palestinians to rebuild, paying for the rebuilding. Now, the next question is, how much of the rebuilding dollars that the United States pumps into Gaza after this is over do you think will be redirected to building military infrastructure, tunnels and bases and bunkers and missile launchers and things like that, and missiles and whatever? If history is any guide, a large portion of the money that gets spent now, in reality, that they say that Qatar, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab countries, as well as the United Nations, will be paying for the rebuilding of Gaza. But the United States pays for about 27% of the entire UN budget. And so obviously some of those dollars are going to come from your pockets and mine if you live in the United States. And it just doesn't give me the warm fuzzies to think about my tax dollars going to pay to rebuild Gaza. It just doesn't. That's not cool. Not cool at all. As a matter of fact, Israel pays into the United Nations, and so Israeli money may very well be going to help rebuild Gaza once this is over. And so in the third phase, the biggest part of the third phase is the deliberations about Gaza's future governance. Who is going to actually be in charge in Gaza? See, they haven't figured that out yet. The Israelis would do it. I think most Israelis want Israel to basically stay in Gaza for the duration because they just need that oversight so that whoever is in, whatever the Palestinians are doing, they're not going to be rebuilding tunnels and that sort of thing. But that is a non-starter for the other Muslim nations, for Egypt, for Qatar, for Iran, for Saudi Arabia, for Jordan, and for the United States. The U.S. under Biden is saying, no, Israel cannot be the governing party in Gaza long term. They have to have some other party. Well, Israel is saying, well, we're not pulling out unless it's somebody besides Hamas. We won't be done in Gaza until Hamas is no longer in charge. Now, it's, their big goal of we're going to keep fighting in Gaza until we wipe out Hamas completely. Well, think about that for a minute. Put your thinking cap on and think about what that really would mean. Because if you've got, I don't know, let's say 20%, let's say 25%, is probably more than that, of the people in Gaza are military age males. Okay? So you're still talking about several 100,000 military age males who still are running around inside Gaza. Obviously, some thousands of those guys are either Hamas fighters straight up or support Hamas. Probably the majority of them support Hamas. And so to say we're going to keep fighting in Gaza until we've killed off everybody who is in any way connected to Hamas means that Israel would have to keep bombing Gaza for the next several years and would have to kill, again, a couple 100,000 people, all while trying to avoid killing women and children and people who are not pro-Hamas. It's pretty hard because separating Hamas from Gaza is like mixing butter and margarine together and then trying to separate them again. There's not really a good way to do that. All right? So it's not really possible for Israel to kill its way out of this problem. It's just not realistic. And so the long-term governance, what they are saying is, okay, fine, we're not going to kill everybody, but we're going to make sure that Hamas cannot govern by insisting on some kind of international supervision over Gaza. Obviously, the Palestinians in Gaza are not capable of governing themselves in a way that is not a threat to Israel. And so because of that, they need adult supervision. And if the world won't let Israel be the adults in Gaza, then they're going to have to get some other adults in there, and they're going to have to just make it work. So they've talked about a peacekeeping force of Qataris, of people from the UAE. I guess the UAE has volunteered to put together a force to govern, not Hamas, to govern Gaza for the near future. And we will just have to wait and see. That's part of the third phase, so that will be some months from now before they really get busy talking about that. Right now, what we're waiting on is we're waiting to see if they actually start releasing hostages and if those happen to be people who are not alive. So, right? I mean, we want people who are living hostages to be released first. While both parties have expressed tentative approval for this. Like I said, when I just came on, the Jerusalem Post was reporting Israel and Hamas agree to a Gaza deal, and Trump says the hostages are to be released shortly. That's the most current news on. They just say that a hostage deal has been reached. That's all. So I guess whether or not this actually results in people being released, living people being released, we're just going to have to wait and see. All right, let's see what kind of questions we got here. Trump was given a physical crown of Jerusalem in 2023. The Bible doesn't say he wore a crown. It just says he was given one. And if, people are talking about Trump being the Antichrist. I've heard a lot of people sort of floating that idea that could Trump be the Antichrist, because the Bible talks about the Antichrist receiving a head wound that is apparently fatal, but then having no ill effects from that head wound, actually surviving a apparently fatal head wound. And they say that they point to the assassination attempt against Donald Trump in Pennsylvania and say, aha, look, I think there's more to it than that. I think that, the Bible is pretty clear that the Antichrist is going to be very popular worldwide, not just popular with half of America. And while Trump is popular with a lot of people around the world, I don't know if he would qualify. I don't know. And what do you think? Do you think Donald Trump is the Antichrist? I mean, I know that would be antithetical to a lot of people's thinking. A lot of people would just lose their minds to hear people say that, because no, we think Trump is the Messiah, not the Antichrist. But again, there's arguments for and against it. A lot of people, I have heard a lot of people trying to make an argument that Trump is the Antichrist. I don't think I am on board with that. There is obviously that very interesting connection with the whole head wound thing, but wow. Okay, so yeah, Trump does not rise from the Holy Roman. Does anybody know what Trump's ancestry is? Where I know his wife comes from Eastern Europe, but where does Trump's family come from? Now, Teresa, again, don't freak out. I'm just saying what I have heard people saying. People have been sending me emails about this and all sorts of stuff. Again, I'm just reporting what I'm hearing. And yeah, a lot of people. So anybody, if you can let me know if you know where Trump comes from. Some people are saying, I think Elon Musk is more likely the Antichrist than Donald Trump. Well, he hasn't got the whole head wound thing going for him, but he's certainly better liked by many people around the world. But I don't know. Do you think they will build underground bomb shelters in the new Gaza when construction starts? Boy, that's a very good question, Kyle. They don't have any reason to build underground shelters if they're not planning to shoot at Israel. And so I think that what Israel should do, because look, it was no secret that the Palestinians were digging these tunnels. It was very obvious. I was in Israel on one of my first trips ever. I don't know, back like 2007 or something. And we went right up to the border of Gaza, and you could see them digging tunnels right there in Beit Hanun. So the Israelis knew they were digging all these tunnels. And they even had specialized equipment to find the tunnels that they were digging under the border into Israel, and to drill holes down into them and then fill them full of concrete so that they couldn't sneak into Israel under the border. But I think if I was Israel, once this was all over and they do start the rebuilding process, I would be flying drones over Gaza 24/7. And if you see them digging anything more than a basement, that place gets droned. You know, that place will spontaneously combust. And I hope that they maintain the ability and, you know, wherewithal to do that if they need to. So Wales. All right. So if Trump is half German, half Scottish, then he wouldn't, that wouldn't qualify him, I don't think, under what the Bible says about the Antichrist coming from the Holy Roman Empire, or I believe like Eastern Europe, something like that. Okay, so maybe that answers that question. I don't know. You know, the whole head wound thing, though, was certainly thought provoking. You have to admit. I mean, like, wow, that certainly looked like a fatal head wound when, you know, that happened. He went down, and you saw the blood and everything, and then he got back up and just raised his hand, and, you know, that was amazing. Amazing. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever witnessed in my life. And so, all right, I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions real quick, and then we will let you go. I think that's about it. Well, I appreciate y'all being a part of these lives. I, again, am going to Washington, D.C. Go ahead and ask your questions, put them in all caps in the comments, and I will keep an eye on there while I'm wrapping up here. I'm headed to Washington, D.C. on Sunday. I will be attending the Newsmax ball for the inauguration, the inaugural ball. Some people I heard jokingly calling it the Commander-in-Chief's ball. Commander-in-Chief's ball. I guess there'll be a lot of cheese balls at the inauguration ball. I don't know. I don't know why they're calling it that. But I will be headed to that, so I have to actually put on a suit. Don't like that idea. But then on Monday, of course, I'll be reporting from outside the inauguration for the most of the morning on the protests that will likely take place. Hopefully they're not riots. And then, you know, the last time that I was, that Trump got inaugurated, I was there for the inauguration with my 19-year-old son, and we covered the riots then, and it was massively violent. I was assaulted multiple times. They were bashing windows and burning cars and all sorts of stuff, and I was there for all of that. Let's hope it's not as violent this time. And so the what was I just lost my train of thought. And then I did get tickets to the inauguration, so I will probably go in to the inauguration and report from there. But I'm going to be going live a lot on Monday for hours and hours of live. So if you want to dip in once in a while and plan to watch, I'll be bringing you along with me covering the inauguration, and we'll see how that goes. All right. So I did see a question go flying by there. If Trump were to support Israel taking governmental control of Gaza, would it be enough? Yeah, possibly. I mean, all Trump has to do is say that he will direct our UN representative to veto any sanctions or anything against Israel in the United Nations. And then under that cover, the Israelis could do what they need to do, I think. Now, there's still going to be a lot of people that are lighting their hair on fire about it. There's already tons of problems with that happening now. But what the Biden administration is doing is they're using that veto power as a threat against Israel. So you're going to do what we want you to do in these negotiations, or we're not going to veto the next round of condemnation against Israel that happens in the UN. That's a real bummer. Doesn't negotiating for hostages give Hamas the upper hand and also gives them an incentive to future hostage taking? John Sullivan, yes, absolutely. Now, one more thing before we go. I just got word before we went live today that Israel has started to conduct airstrikes inside Syria against HTS. This is breaking news, folks. This is the first time that Israel has struck directly against HTS. They are that's a big deal because HTS has been making noises like, no, we don't have any beef with Israel. We don't want to fight against Israel. We're not going to be a threat to Israel for the time being. And Israel apparently saw something happening in Damascus that they perceived to be a threat. So they just sent a missile down there. For its part, HTS, this is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, says that 3 people were killed in the strike. No word on any retaliation or planned or anything like that. Look, Israel has been finding it in Syria when they've got these troops that have created a buffer zone now inside Syria that's about 10 miles deep from the border. That's big. And that's in order to stop anybody from shooting mortars or rockets at Israel from Syria. They also are establishing a 60-kilometer, what they're calling an intelligence corridor inside Syria. Thank you, Tessa. Inside Syria, in order to keep an eye on things, and they're reserved the right to strike at anything that looks like a threat. Well, apparently, in that process, the IDF has found thousands, more than 3,000 munitions, rocket launchers, rockets, missiles, weapons, machine guns, all sorts of stuff, as they've cleared out that area around Quneitra, just across the border. And there are even more inside the area that's held by HTS. And so probably what they saw was HTS driving around in tanks or driving a missile launcher around with some missiles on it. Anything that looks like it could be a threat to Israel, and Israel's going to smoke that thing. And so they did for the first time in Damascus, and we will see what happens, what kind of response comes from HTS. So stay tuned for that. Keep an eye on that. Okay, that's all I got for today, folks. God bless you, and thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.